The NBA released its annual schedule. We're going to talk all about the Pistons and how they are going to fare. Some tougher months, some easier months. We're going to get into that and more on the next edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, and joining me this week, fresh off of scouring the Pistons schedule like a madman, is Aaron Johnson. Aaron, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing good. It felt like a crash course. I felt like I was, right back before in college, and it was, an hour before our exam, and, I hadn't read the book or whatever, and I had to just quickly cram and get in the information that I can. That's, not necessarily my fault this time. The NBA releasing the schedule at 3:00 on a Thursday. I was driving when the schedule released, so a little bit of like just that last hour or so, taking a look at the schedule, trying to find the soft points in it. There's definitely a lot of difficult stretches for Detroit that we're going to talk about, but I'm glad the schedule released. It gives us something to dive into. I know people are excited to get closer to the NBA season. This signifies that we're getting closer because before you know it, teams are going to be reporting for training camp. It's going to be media day. It's going to be preseason. We are inching closer, folks, and I cannot wait to get into this schedule breakdown with you, my friend Mike.
Yep. We're going to talk about the schedule. We're going to talk about those soft points. We're going to talk about a brutal first 6 games that the Pistons have. And then they do get a nationally televised game as well. So we're going to get into that and probably some ins and outs throughout the show. But before we get any further, I do want to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, and that's BetOnline. And BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Football is also right around the corner. We're going to be drafting our fantasy football team before you know it. And that's one of my favorite things of the year, not only because it takes like 3 hours to get done, but kind of dictates my Sundays for the next several months. But from the preseason, NFL to college kickoff, BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Do you think you know your stuff? Get in on the winner-take-all $300,000 NFL Survivor pool for the upcoming season. And when the game's over, you can head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head on over to the website today and use promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. And get in on the action. Again, that's BLEAV. Make sure that you use our promo code if you are going to use BetOnline. BetOnline, the game starts here. So let's get right into it. Let's get right into the schedule, since this is the most we've had to talk about in months at this point. Not months, weeks, not months. Free agency was last month.
I will say, I'll just tell the folks, as we were prepping for this podcast, it was going to be a tougher show had the schedule not released. Let's just, viewer discretion or whatever. It was going to be a tougher show to get through. So the schedule coming through, it saves us for a week. We're ready to talk about it. I think, look, the first place to start is where it all begins. The Pistons open the season on Wednesday, October 23rd in Detroit against the Indiana Pacers, but it starts off a brutal stretch to begin the season. Really just throughout October and the first game of November. The first 6 teams that they play all are Eastern Conference playoff teams from last year, and all of them look to be, just as good or if not better compared to the teams they were last season. I'll just run through the order of teams that they play in their first 6. In Detroit against Indiana, at Cleveland, home versus Boston, at Miami, at Philadelphia, and then home against New York on Friday, November 1st. Look, I don't know what the NBA schedule makers were doing here, but wow, you couldn't really ask for a tougher start to the season if you're the Pistons.
Yeah, you play the 2 Eastern Conference Finals team, the NBA champion, You face the team that probably, arguably made the biggest splash in free agency in the Sixers getting Paul George. And then you play the team that made the second biggest gain, and that's the New York Knicks by getting Mikal Bridges and signing everybody from Villanova. So that's a tough 6 games. I mean, are they going to win any of those first 6 games?
That's the $1 million question, right? I mean, I tweeted out just, saying, hey, this is a brutal start to the season. And I got a bunch of quotes. I got some 3-3s. I got some 1-5s. I got some 0-6s.
3-3.
Some diehard fans that said this is Kate's coming out party. They're going to go 6-0 and set the league on fire. Look, man,
I want what they're having.
I think 2-4, and you got to feel pretty good. Like,
oh yeah, we'll take 2 and 4.
And it's like, yeah, you get Boston at home, but it's the defending champs. You got to go to Cleveland. You got to go to Philadelphia. It's not easy. These are playoff teams from last year, and all of them, none of them are taking a step back in terms of their roster they're bringing to the table. New York's definitely better. Philadelphia's definitely better. So, I mean, look, you come out of there. Let's say you can take that home opener against Indiana. It's the start of a new season. You're at home. You've got the crowd behind you. Like, I think that might be, trying to look at the schedule, the most winnable game for Detroit there. Maybe they go out and steal a game in Miami. I don't know. This is it's a tough start. I think 2-4. I'm sorry, that's got to have you feeling pretty good considering the competition.
That's a win.
This is a new team too. Like, the Pistons aren't
right.
There's a lot of new guys that they're going to be trying to fit in and figure out what rotations work best, what players fit with who best. So, like, there's a learning curve there. There's a learning process there, and a new coach implementing a new system on top of that. So there's a lot of things going on top of just you're facing teams to start the year. 2-4. Look, I'm sorry, 3-3. That's. We might be saying, hey, this is going to end up being a playoff team if you're 3-3.
Yeah,
for those first 6 games of the year.
Yeah, Indiana is winnable. People were surprised they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. As a Cleveland Cavaliers supporter, I've been let down plenty. I wouldn't be surprised if the Cavs drop a game at home, because they're also integrating a new head coach in Kenny Atkinson, and they're going to have, potentially a hellstorm of people booing JB. I really hope not, but I wouldn't be surprised if they, find a way to lose that game. The Cavs were particularly able to do that before.
Why would they boo?
I don't know. People were sick of JB by the end. I think there is just some hate for whatever reason for his coaching decisions, for overstaying his welcome, whatever the case may be. Cavs fans are they've got some vinegar in their veins for sure. I don't think that's going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if Cleveland found a way to lose that. Boston's going to be very, very hard, as they are every time. The Heat are also very difficult all the time. I mean, remember last year the Pistons lost by 2 to open up the season against the Heat, and we were all saying, what a huge win, what a great almost win. That's a win in Detroit's book, and then the rest of it was just forgettable after that.
How naive we were.
We just didn't know. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're 0-6 to start the year. I think 1-5 would be, probably pretty realistic. I think they could beat Indiana opening night. I think they could beat Miami, because that's one of those teams that kind of is running it back, and they weren't really that good to begin with. November gets, it has some soft spots. November, like we already said, they play the New York Knicks to start off. Then they play the Brooklyn Nets. That's on the road. They have the Lakers at home. Then they play the Charlotte Hornets, Atlanta, Houston. Then they have Miami again, followed by the Bucks. And then they have another soft spot of the schedule. This is one of those easier areas. They play Toronto, who's not going to be very good, I don't think. The Washington Wizards, who also are not going to be very good. Chicago, who's not going to have DeMar DeRozan, and again, weren't that good to begin with. Charlotte, then they play the Orlando Magic, followed by Toronto again, and then they finish out the year playing Memphis and Indiana. So I think a soft spot in the schedule. I think they can rattle off a couple of wins. Again, this is a better team. This is going to be a team with a different coach that has a track record for being successful in the regular season, and you get some pretty bad teams kind of in that glut of the middle of the month there.
Yeah, November definitely seems like it might be the softest month in terms of the quality of opponents that the Pistons get. What's tough is and look, it's hard to win in the NBA. You're never going to get a perfect schedule, but it's like, yes, they do get this quote unquote softer spot here, but it's like you're going on the road for a ton of these games. You've got a 3-game road trip, and then you go home the next day and play the Bulls. Then you go back out on the road for another 2. It's like, these are definitely more winnable games just in terms of the quality of opponents they're playing. A lot of road games there in November, it feels like, at least after that first 2 weeks or week and a half of the month, they go out on the road a lot. But if the Pistons are serious about being better, if the Pistons are serious about being more competitive, being more mature, and looking like an actual NBA team, there's just not, you can't use the excuse of, oh, there's a lot of road games here, with the schedule just beat us. Like, you have to go out and you have to start winning some of these games. I think you can make that same case for if you're actually going to be a better team, you've got to beat some decent teams. They need to win 2 of the first 6 games. If they're serious about what they say and how they're acting, they will find a way to win some of these games. And whether it's the fact that they have to play a back-to-back, or they have to go out on the road, or the quality of the opponent's more difficult, teams got to find ways. And if you're better than what you were last year, which by God you need to be, you win some of these games. They take advantage of a November that is softer in terms of the strength of schedule.
And we didn't really talk about this at the beginning, but they do have 15 back-to-backs, which is not the most in the NBA. I actually don't know which team has the most in the NBA. I'll have to try to find that during the pod. But they've got 15 back-to-backs. They do play Cleveland and Boston back-to-back in October, which is just who decided this? I think they have 2 back-to-backs in November. Yeah, they play the Heat and the Bucks back-to-back. Then they play the Wizards and Bulls back-to-back. So yeah, none of these are easy. When we say soft spot, we mean soft spot relative to, a really hard stretch, which is what they have in October. There's no soft spot. There's just less difficult spots, especially for a team that's already not going to be very good.
What's weird is I thought the league had made a point in years past to cut down on back-to-backs. And I want to say at one point, the average number of back-to-backs for a team was down to 11. And the Pistons have always been seemingly on the higher end of the number of back-to-backs when it comes to how many they've had compared to other teams. This year, 15. That feels like the most it's been in a while. And the Pistons always seem to be one of the teams that has the most back-to-backs across the league. So, yeah, 3 of them in November, because they end the month at Indiana and then
you're
back
right.
home the next day against Philadelphia. So it's no breaks. And then their first 2 games in December are a back-to-back. They get a couple days off, and then they get Milwaukee and Boston, 1 at home, 1 on the road. So it's you're at home, you've then got to travel overnight, and you're traveling overnight to play the reigning champions. That's a schedule loss, even if you're a good team, let alone a 14-win team from last season. So
they play Boston twice to begin the season, and both of them are the second game of a back-to-back.
Nice.
Delightful. Speaking of December, let's roll into December. It's kind of up in the air for December because the NBA Cup begins December 10th. So that part of the schedule is not quite known. But not counting the NBA Cup, still, December looks pretty rough. We already talked about you play the Bucks and the Celtics back-to-back, and you play the New York Knicks 3 days later. You play the Utah Jazz December 19th, which is a home game. Yes, which is at home. And then you begin a West Coast swing right around Christmas time, which is super unfortunate for all the beat guys. You play Phoenix the 21st. You play the Lakers the 23rd. You play the Sacramento Kings the 26th. And then you play Denver the 28th. So that is a gauntlet of the Western Conference. The only teams you're really missing are Oklahoma City. So December's tough. Let's not mince any words.
Just a brutal time for that patented Western Conference road trip. In years past, it was 5 or 6 games out on the road, and they had, the Clippers and Portland in there, and you had on top of the Lakers and Sacramento. But this year they cut it for Detroit, and now they have 2 4-game Western Conference road trips. This one, though, by far the toughest when you look at the quality of opponent, the time of year. I mean, having to travel on the opposite side of the country, not even close to Detroit. They're on the opposite side of the country for Christmas. Like, that's just brutal. I mean, there's just the quality of opponent, time of year, very, very tough for Detroit. And all of those teams are very, very good. All of them are playoff teams. Obviously, Denver, a champion level team. Phoenix, very good. That's tough for Detroit. And it culminates a very tough month overall, because their cup teams that they're going to play in December are not, no, there's good teams in that group as well. I think Cleveland's in it. I think Toronto's in it. Oh, I don't have it pulled up, but there's some good teams in there that they're going to have to play, in between December 7th and December 19th. There will be some challenges there as well. So it's a very tough month. I'd say you could make a case outside of that start of the season. This is going to be the toughest month for Detroit in December.
So let me pull that up right now for the NBA Cup. The teams that are in their draw: Milwaukee, Indiana, Miami, and Toronto.
Okay, yeah, Toronto. I was wrong in Cleveland. So good thing I didn't keep going.
Yeah.
I was going to say Milwaukee, and I wasn't going to say Miami. So, but tough teams, right?
So those are tough. Those are tough teams. Those are tough teams. The Bucks, as a little aside, the Bucks have been totally left for dead in the Eastern Conference hierarchy. The Sixers got better, yes. The Celtics won the championship, yes. The Knicks got Mikal Bridges, flashy. The Bucks still have Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and when the rest of their guys are healthy, it's, that's a tough team to beat. They were not healthy for the playoffs, which helped the Indiana Pacers move on, and then the Pacers got an injured Knicks team. So just as an aside, the Bucks are like kind of an afterthought for some reason, despite having 2 of the best players on the planet. Just to throw that out there, because I've seen a lot of people talking about, well, who is Boston going to play in the Eastern Conference Finals? They're going to play the Knicks. They're going to play the Sixers. Let us not forget about the Bucks. I know they have Dak Rivers. Let the jokes fly, but that's a tough group for Detroit. Between them and Toronto, that'll be tough. Let's go into the new year on our schedule month by month. And January, I don't have too many thoughts on January, except the beginning of the month is kind of soft. Orlando is, a good team who made a big leap. But again, they seem fairly beatable. They didn't solve all their offensive problems. Charlotte, another winnable game. The Wolves going to be tough. Portland, kind of up in the air, but the Nets, not very good. Golden State, Toronto, and then you get into a little bit of a tougher part of the schedule. You play the Knicks, you play the Pacers, you play the Suns, you play a very weird Houston Rockets team that could be good, could be bad, and then you round out the year with Atlanta, Orlando, Cleveland, again, the Pacers, and then the last game of the month is against the Western Conference champion Dallas Mavericks. So January, what do you think about the month of January? It's kind of like an even-keeled sort of month. They face some good teams, particularly towards the end, but they face few more bad teams at the beginning of January.
Here's my thoughts on January. Can the Pistons stay afloat through that Western Conference road trip to end 2024? Can they keep their heads above water? Can they keep the morale high, even if they go out there and they lose all 4 of those games? Because they have an opportunity to string together some wins in January. If I'm the Pistons and I'm looking at the schedule, I'm saying, hey, we've got to make sure we're ready to go on January 1st, because that's an opportunity for us to start gaining some ground, to hopefully start stacking some wins and climb the rankings a little bit. Obviously, that 4-game road trip to end 2024 is going to be brutal for them. But if they can stay afloat and everyone can continue their buy-in that hopefully JB Bickerstaff is bringing to this team and instilling in this team, there are opportunities to go on a run in January, especially that first 2 weeks where they do get a team like Orlando who, yes, they're a playoff team and they're good. Orlando deserves all their flowers. But like, again, if you're a better team than you were last year, you can at least compete with them. You should be beating the teams in Charlotte, in Portland, in Brooklyn, in Toronto. You know, you've got to find ways to, against a Golden State team that isn't as good as they used to be, and you're getting them at home. You've got to find ways to win some of these games. And January looks like a month where the Pistons could have, in theory, one of their better months in terms of a win-loss record, just looking at the quality of opponents, assuming they can, just keep their heads above water after that December stretch.
Yeah, good call with Golden State because they are not very good. Steph Curry is obviously very good, but they're a team that had some very vulnerable pain points, and they didn't really solve any of them. Yet they do get 24 nationally televised games because of Steph Curry. And they get to host the Lakers on Christmas Day because the NBA just can't not have LeBron playing Steph. But that's a good call on Golden State. That's a quietly beatable team to me. They'll make some trade, I'm sure, that throws that completely out. But as of right now, that's another winnable game for sure. Speaking of winnable games, February is another soft month, at least at the front half. They play the Bulls February 2nd. They have another back-to-back. They play the Atlanta Hawks. I almost said the Atlanta Falcons. I'm really on like NFL mode. Then they play Cleveland again at home. They'll play the 76ers. They'll play Charlotte. Then they have a weird back-to-back on the road against the Bulls on the 11th and the 12th, followed by All-Star break, and then they play the San Antonio Spurs coming out of the break on the 21st down in San Antonio. And then they play the Hawks, which kind of ends their soft schedule because then they play the Clippers, the Celtics, and the Nuggets. Even the diminished LA Clippers should still be good. They still have James Harden. They still have Kawhi Leonard. They still have a good coach in Ty Lue and a slew of good bench players. But that beginning of the month between Chicago 3 times in the month, which is very strange. And as you pointed out, they're going to play the Bulls 3 times in 10 days. The Hawks, who are young and kind of weird, they play Charlotte. They play the Spurs. And a lot of teams are like expecting, or rather a lot of fans are thinking that San Antonio is just going to jump up a tier because they got aging Chris Paul and Victor Wembanyama will take a step forward. I don't necessarily know if that's going to be the case. I mean, they were still a bad team last year. I don't think they're going to be dramatically better this year. So that to me is still a very winnable game. And again, you get the Hawks, who are a complete grab bag. I mean, maybe Trae Young goes off. Maybe he's on a different team by then. Who really knows? But they're kind of those weird teams. And then you end the month with 3 tough teams. Again, you play the Boston Celtics. This time it's not on the second game of back-to-back, but it'll still be hard.
A 6-game homestand to start the month, their longest homestand of the season, and with some opponents that they should certainly be able to beat. That's again where I'm thinking, and if I'm looking at the schedule, if I'm Detroit, we've got to continue momentum from January and catapult that into a strong end to the first half of the season. Let's compete and let's win some games in that 6-game homestand. You get Chicago back-to-back before the All-Star break in Chicago. You have a day off before that to travel to Chicago and get settled in. Like, I look at that February, that start of the month before the All-Star break, that's another key opportunity for Detroit to build, bring in some wins, and feel a little bit more confident heading into the All-Star break, where when they come out, they get Atlanta and San Antonio on the road. But then you mentioned that very difficult 3-game stretch at home against 3 of the betterish teams in the NBA, just because the Clippers, we don't necessarily know what they're going to be, but obviously Boston and Denver, 2 of the best in the league. So that beginning of the month, that before the All-Star break stretch, the Pistons have to capitalize on. That's where I look at the schedule for February and say that's where the wins can come from.
Yeah, that beginning of the month, they'll have some real opportunities. And this is right before the trading deadline, which I believe is March 6th, February 6th. Did I just lose my mind?
I think it's
When is
usually
the deadline?
Well, I'll also say here is
it's
Friday, February 7th game, part of that 6-game homestand is Detroit's only nationally televised game against the Sixers. That's at 7:30 and it's on ESPN. They do get, 2 or 3 NBA TV games throughout the rest of this.
Yes.
They get their one actually nationally televised game during that homestand in Detroit. So there will hopefully be some eyes on that and you can, if you're in Detroit, hopefully you're building momentum there too, to where it's like, hey, the Pistons have, had a decent January. They're having a decent start to the month in February, and you can maybe start building that narrative at home against Philadelphia on a nationally televised game that things are starting to change in Detroit. That's just completely like thinking way ahead. Who knows what this team's going to look like by then? Who knows who's going to be healthy? Who knows who's hurt? But it's like, if you're starting to like think out narratives, that's where my head goes.
Yeah, and the deadline is the 6th of February. I don't know why I was thinking March for some reason. So in between Cleveland and Philadelphia, that Sixers game going to be probably the first game of the post-deadline Pistons. So who knows what that's going to look like. One would assume the 76ers are going to be trying to load up if they can at the deadline, as Daryl Morey always will be looking to do. So you could have some teams looking different. You could have Zach LaVine gone off of the Bulls. You could have, San Antonio selling as they probably try to tank for Cooper Flag. Same deal with the Atlanta Hawks. So February is soft. They have to take advantage. I'll be hopeful and say that they do. But March, again, kind of has some tougher teams scattered around there, particularly at the end. But again, to me, fairly soft out of the gate. You get the Brooklyn Nets, you get the Utah Jazz, who again could be a team totally tanking to try to get Cooper Flag. The Clippers, now they're going to be tough again. And this is your like pseudo West Coast swing because you play Utah, you play the Clippers in their brand new dome, you play the Warriors, and then you play Portland. You come home for another one of those weird back-to-backs against the Washington Wizards. And then it kind of gets tough pretty much the rest of the month. Oklahoma City, the Pelicans, Miami, Dallas, the Pelicans again, San Antonio, Cleveland, and then you finish the month of March against the Timberwolves. So you face a slew of playoff teams, and not just playoff teams that went fairly far into their respective conference playoffs. But you do have some easier games at the beginning of the month with the Nets, with Portland, and then with the Washington Wizards back-to-back.
It feels like we're kind of noticing a trend as we talk about this outside of October, which it's technically at the end of the month, so it doesn't really fit into this anyway. But it feels like each month the Pistons schedule is a little bit softer, and as the month goes on, once you get towards the end, it's more difficult. And that is the case here again in March, because yes, they do start that 4-game Western Conference road trip, that second one in March and in that first week of March, but you get Brooklyn at home the first day of March, and you get Utah on the first day of that Western Conference road trip. So you could at least start the month with a couple wins there. And then, you get that stretch where you end the road trip in Portland. It's going to be tough because it's on the second night of a back-to-back. You're just ready to get home at that point. But it's a game you can win. You get Washington a couple of times, but then the month gets difficult. And I would say it stays pretty difficult in April as well. I don't really look at March as like a month where it's like, oh, it seems super soft to me or it seems super difficult to me. It just kind of seems like it's kind of pedestrian. There's some tougher stretches. There's some stretches that look a little bit easier on paper. I definitely feel there's tougher months like December, and I definitely feel like there's easier months like a January, like a February. March just seems kind of in the middle to me. And who knows what the Pistons will look like in March, because you mentioned in February, there's the trade deadline. Depending on where the Pistons are at, Trajan Langdon could be selling off guys like Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, or Paul Reed. anyone that is maybe helping them but is on a veteran contract and can be moved for a potential future asset. So they could also be at that point part of that group that's, tanking for Cooper Flag or anything like that. So March, yeah, just kind of in the middle for me, but it's a tough end too, because you get Cleveland and then you got to play at Minnesota and then you start into April at Oklahoma City. So there's a lot of good teams in the NBA is what I look at it when I schedule. It's like I look at the Pistons, say, hey, they got better this summer. Like they made some good moves, but then you look across the league and you're like, well, shit, there's still a lot of really good teams, and the Pistons are not at the level.
There are. And even at the end of March, you have a lot of teams that are, in that Western Conference. That's going to be a tight conference. There's not going to be any resting of guys coasting into the first round of the playoffs. They're going to be jockeying for position probably until the last day of the regular season. So you're not going to get probably the Wolves resting Anthony Edwards. You're not going to get the Pelicans resting Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram. You're not going to get Luka Doncic getting a rare day off. Maybe not. Who knows? And then at the beginning of March, you do play the Nets at home, and one would assume that's Joe Harris's jersey retirement night. So you start the year off on a positive note with everybody joyfully. Anyway, never mind. I couldn't keep that going for too long. But yes, April to me is right up there with December as brutally tough. You basically have one winnable game to me, although maybe that last game against the Bucks could be a total crapshoot because playoff seeding might be decided by then. They play the Thunder April 2nd. They play Toronto again, winnable. That's another tanking team. You play the Memphis Grizzlies on the 5th of April, Sacramento, New York Knicks, and then you finish off the season with the Bucks back to back. The last day of the regular season would be April 13th. But again, that's another tough month. I mean, that's 5-6 playoff teams and plus Toronto. So to me, that's right up there. Not as tough as December, but it's right up there in terms of just the number of games you're probably not going to have much of a shot in that late in the season.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it just kind of goes back to what version of the Pistons are you getting at that point? Like, are they still trying to be competitive? Or, even if this team takes a sizable step compared to last season, like they're still, we've talked about, probably not a playoff team. They might have guys shut down by then. Other teams, like, I don't know, in the Western Conference, I don't know who's resting guys in that first week of April. Like you mentioned, it's going to be a very tight race out west. OKC, Memphis, Sacramento, those all figure to be teams jockeying for playoff position. And then the East could end up being the same thing. I mean, you've got Milwaukee a couple times, you've got New York. So it's a tough month. And the Pistons at that point are either under new leadership, trying to be more competitive and not, just mailing it in at the end of the year like they did under Troy Weaver, or they're tanking and these games are going to be losses no matter what. So tough end of the season on paper. It'll be interesting to see what version of the Pistons are playing basketball in late March and in April, because that will tell you where this franchise is maybe at heading into another offseason.
Right. So that's the regular season. We went through every month, almost every game. The over-under for the Pistons was set at 24.5, I believe. Aaron, did your thoughts on that over-under change at all based on the schedule being released? Did it, do you think they're going to have more wins? Do you think they're going to have fewer wins? Like, what are you feeling now about the over-under for this team?
So pre-schedule release, I said they go over 24.5 wins, and I'm not changing that now. Every team has to play 82 games. Every team has to play every other team in the NBA. Like, yes, there are parts of the schedule where things are easier. There are parts of the schedule where your schedule is more difficult than another team's. But in the grand scheme of things, it pretty much is always balanced out. Like, yes, there's strength of schedule. Yes, there are parts of this schedule that look very, very difficult for Detroit. We talked about them in October. We talked about them in December. We talked about them in April. But we also highlighted opportunities for this team to win games, to beat teams that they are either equal to or should be better than. And for those reasons, like, I'm not going to change my opinion because the Pistons play 6 good teams to start the year. Odds are, even if their schedule was average at the start of the season, they were going to play at least 3 good teams to start the year. And if you're serious about winning more games and being more competitive, you find ways to beat teams that are better than you. You just do. So I'm not going to say the Pistons are going to win 15 more games or even 5 more games after looking at the schedule, but I do believe they're going to go over that 24.5 mark. It might only be 25. It might be 25, it might be 26 wins, but I still think they go over. I think there's enough opportunity here. And if you believe in what this team did this offseason in adding NBA players around Cade Cunningham, in trying to build a more suitable NBA roster, and believing in the internal development of the young core that they've amassed, they will be a better team than they were last year, and they'll find a way to win more games than they did a season ago.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with the over as well. Again, the NBA moves so fast, especially around the deadline. And I think there's still a potential for moves before training camp, like we saw with Donovan Mitchell being moved. I think you could still see somebody moved. It's not going to be Lauri Markkanen, but it could be somebody else. So bearing that, I think the Pistons have made enough meaningful cultural improvements and meaningful, like, have actual NBA players on the roster type of moves that they're going to be more competitive. And I think just by being slightly more competitive with guys like Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway, and Tobias Harris, you're going to give yourself more bites of the apple, more bullets in your chamber. And, you might squeak out a win that you may not have been able to do last year because you were playing mostly kids or all bench lineups like in a complete insane person. So removing those things, I think, is going to give them at least more opportunity to get a win, whereas there were games last year where they're down 40 points and this is, just pointless. That there's going to be less of that. So I would say the Pistons are going to squeak the over. I think it could be 25, just right at that line, but I'll take the over. I'll be optimistic. We spent so much time during the regular season being pessimistic, and everybody gets mad at us for being pessimistic about Troy Weaver or James Wiseman or whatever. 2 things we don't have to talk about this year, by the way. So that is nice to have off of our plate. But I'll take the over. You're totally right. They're going to have to play good teams. They're going to play bad teams, and they should be good enough that you're not going to be, totally down and out every single month at some point. They have enough NBA level talent that they're going to stick around in games, and they might win an extra 3, 4, 5 just by having decent NBA players on their roster as opposed to the corpse of Joe Harris and Killian Hayes doing just nothing out there.
Now that we've gone through the schedule, I feel like I'm ready more than ever for basketball to be back. I can watch basketball year round. I have no problem doing it. And so not having it, like, outside of the Olympics, not having the Pistons on, like, I'm ready for basketball to return. I wish we could kind of just fast forward and get to at least like media day, at least to that start of training camp. I guess we don't have to fast forward all the way to October 23rd, but can we get to, like, when things really start to progress towards the new season? We are, at least a month out from media day and training camp. Training camp is usually the first week of September. So we're a month and a half out from that still. Excuse me. Wow. Yeah. No. Time. Aaron, think. We're a few weeks out from training camp. I don't know. I give up. Brain's an overload. Mike, help me.
You give up. I'm pulling up. Okay, so Celtics and Nuggets media day, September 24th.
Okay, so we're a month out.
Media day for everyone else is September 30th.
All right, so about a month and a half out till media day. Okay.
Right. In fact, judging by this, it's a little bit less than 2 months until media day. And then the Abu Dhabi games, October 4th and 6th, which are preseason games. The NBA Canada series in Montreal, Hall of Fame enshrinement weekend, and then the start of the season is October 22nd. Technically, the Pistons will play the day after. So September 24th. And then for the rest of us, for the Pistons, it'll be September 30th. So we are approaching, or like a month and a half out. Yeah, a month and a half out.
Well, it can come soon enough at this point. I am ready for NBA basketball to be back in full swing for sure.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. This is going to be. Is this more or less interesting than how we were last year when Monty Williams was head coach?
More for sure. More for sure. Because
this is more interesting, right?
we still were saying, like, this team's not, granted, the win total was higher than it is this year, but we were saying this team's not, going over their 27.5 win total. Like, we knew how flawed the roster still was. We knew how flawed Troy Weaver still was. Like, at least right now, things haven't gone, awry with Trajan Langdon or JB Bickerstaff yet. So there's that, like, you want to see what happens first. You want to see if Langdon's, moves have worked. You want to see if Bickerstaff can be better than Monty Williams, which is not should not be hard to do whatsoever, considering Monty Williams.
The bar is the floor.
The bar is the Earth's core at this point. Like, it's low. So I'm ready for it. And then, yeah, I'm definitely more interested this year than I was last year, because last year the roster was the same. We knew it was a bad roster. This year it's at least a better team. It's a better group of players, and it's a new group of leadership trying to turn this thing around. Let's see if they can.
I'm sensing some Joe Harris slander. That is your cap space boy last year.
Yeah. That was the big move. Him and Monty Morris, who played 6 games for the Pistons after all was said and done.
Played like an hour and 10 minutes total on the court.
Definitely more excited and more intrigued this time around compared to last year.
Yeah, I would agree. Not just because of JB and a guy that I think is more down to earth and, actually wants to be a coach in the NBA as opposed to his predecessor, who I don't really know if he wanted to be a head coach. He just didn't want to be stupid and turn down that much money, which I get. So, not just because of JB being an actual coach who wants to coach. I think you've made enough meaningful changes on the roster that this is not a team that is going to go out and get dumped every night. Like, it felt towards that middle of the season, in the middle of that losing streak, it felt like the Pistons were going to lose 30 plus games. There was no end in sight, but I don't have that feeling this year at all. Maybe it's that blind preseason optimism, but I truly don't think that we're going to be staring at something as horrific as last year. You're going to see better basketball. Aaron, that's the schedule. Any last minute thoughts, plugs that you want to have before we sign off?
Well, look, as always, need whoever's watching, whoever's listening, to click the subscribe button, to click the follow button, to click the like button. Help us out. We're trying to grow, trying to do it the right way. We need your guys' support in order to do that. I'd also say, please go to palaceofpistons.com, subscribe for free. You will get all of our posts, our podcasts, our written content sent directly to your email as soon as it is published live. Please go to Substack and subscribe to our website. It tremendously helps us out as we continue to try to grow Palace of Pistons and the Palace of Pistons brand. Look, I appreciate everyone that has kind words every week, that doesn't have kind words every week and tells us you guys don't know what you're talking about. You guys have fallen off. You guys are idiots. You guys don't know ball. I appreciate all of that. So keep it coming.
Some of that's true.
Debatable. But tell us what you think in the comments. We appreciate it. Love having the conversation. Love seeing the conversation. And look, we're getting closer to the season. The schedule release is certainly a sign of that. So excited to get to the start of the new season and the return of Piston basketball.
In a long time since we've probably said that. It actually hasn't, because we said this at the beginning of last year and the year before that and the year before that. And since we've been doing this podcast, which is we're closer to a 10-year anniversary of this podcast than we are a 0-year anniversary of doing the podcast together. If you can believe that, my friend. We've been doing this for a long time. We've been doing this for a long time, and we're planning out when we're going to have our next Palace of Pistons meetup in Detroit. I suggested everyone come to Cleveland for Pistons Cavs, but not everybody has jobs because the tickets are starting at like $400 or so for opening night. So we'll have to find another game, another option. Maybe it's that Atlanta Hawks game, like at the beginning of November. Maybe it's the New York Knicks where they're going to break that 0-5 start and win their win the sixth game of the season. But yes, all the comments, we do see them. We do enjoy them, even though you may not enjoy us entirely. We appreciate the feedback, and we appreciate everybody listening long enough to want to provide feedback and care enough to provide feedback. I think that's a really neat thing. But please, if you are not subscribed to us, please do so. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, it's going to be in the description, whether that be on YouTube or your favorite podcast player. It does mean a lot to us, and we want to keep doing this, and we want people to be reading it. We don't want to just spill it into the into the void. So I guess that's it. That's going to do it for this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. We will have more to talk about. I'm sure that Jasper will have thoughts on the schedule next week, assuming he's able to actually be here for the pod, and we could all do it at the same time. And as we hurtle towards the start of training camp, start of the regular season, we'll be covering every bit of the Pistons leading up to that, and we hope that you'll be joining us along the way. So for my co-host, Aaron Johnson, I am Mike Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network, and we will see you all next time.